Thank you very much, Mathilde, for the invitation. Today I'm presenting data that is not entirely mine, so sorry about that. Actually, I'm not sorry at all. I'm quite proud actually of this data because it's one of my former PhD student in Richelieu, who did her PhD at Shandong University, who's now in postdoc in Zhejiang University in Hangzhou. And so what I will talk to you about is a specific case study related to cultural evolution and specifically exaptation. And the question that we have been trying to resolve actually in the course of our PhD was what were the processes responsible actually for cultural changes in material culture from the Longshan Neolithic and to the Yueshi Bronze Age in the Haidai region. So I mean, this is a lot of terms that we are not very used to, so I'll try to make a brief introduction afterwards to put you into context. But before doing this introduction, I would like to start with my conclusions, which is something odd perhaps, but I would like to insist throughout this presentation, or hopefully this will be something that you will be able to appreciate by yourself. First, I would like to point out that cultural changes are multifaceted and must be inquired through converging lines or converging sources. Second, I would like to insist also on the fact that fully shaped bone tools are particularly great proxies to investigate cultural changes. And this is because we can impose on this specific aspect of material culture with techniques adapted to working osseous material. We can apply shapes that are reproduced with a very high precision, and therefore we can use these shapes and the technology and the typology in order to investigate cultural changes. And finally, for the specific case study that I will present to you today, I will demonstrate that contrary to dominant hypothesis, changes in osseous technology from the late Neolithic to the early Bronze Age in the eastern part of China suggest a persistence of cultural tradition, albeit with an increased flexibility, rather than a major population replacement. And so we will be talking about this. So, no, that's the other way around. Where is the Haidai region? The Haidai region is located in eastern China. You have, it's actually, it's the Shandong province. So you have here the Haidai mountains, and it's everything from these mountains to the east, from the Yellow River to the Hangzhou area in the back. And the site I will be speaking about is Yinjiachang, is located south of the Haidai region, of the Haidai mountains. Chronologically, what I'm going to be talking about is some period of transition between the last cultural entity of the Neolithic in eastern China, the Longshan culture, and the first Bronze Age, culture called Yueshi. So just to give you a little bit of background on the cultural context, the two cultures are very distinct. During the Longshan, you have this very eggshell thin pottery with a black lacquer, actually, indicates a high mastery in pottery making. And in the Yueshi culture, the pottery becomes crude. It kind of goes backward in terms of what you would expect actually from an evolution where everything becomes more and more complex. It is simplified, the types are much less impressive, and the thickness is actually also much thicker, which seems to indicate also a change in the type of technology used for making these potteries. This is the main proxy that was used by archaeologists until recently to talk about cultural changes between these two periods. Other proxies include architecture, obviously, but also the burials. In the Longshan culture, we have burials that are very well defined, complex, associated with numerous burial offerings, while in the Yueshi we have virtually almost no burial at this specific site. And so traditionally, archaeologists have provided three major hypotheses to explain this change in culture in the Eastern Chinese region, in the Haidai region. The first and most important one was the major population replacement that they associate with an invasion from people coming from the Xiajiadian Peninsula, currently Liaoning, who would have invaded the Xiajiadian culture. And so the bearer of this culture would have come from the Liaodong Peninsula to the Jiaodong Peninsula, which is present-day Shandong province, and would have replaced basically all the cultural group inhabiting there, bringing with them a material culture that was fairly crude. The second hypothesis was environmental pressure, where repeated flood would have affected basically the rice paddy oriented agriculture and would have forced the group to split and relocate and later during the Yueshi culture reinvestigate the region that were abandoned at the end of the Longshan. And this would be the reason why some sort of loss in cultural knowledge, in traditional knowledge, would have led to a much cruder or less advanced material culture. And finally, the third one the third hypothesis states that the Longshan and the Yueshi are contemporaneous culture that inhabit the same region, but we'll rule this one out right away because there are no stratified sites actually that would attest to such thing. The Yueshi culture always comes after the Longshan culture. So we might have to test the former two hypotheses. So my former PhD studied quite a big assemblage, not only from Yinjiachan, but here I'm just going through the material culture, and we'll speak a little bit about how this could answer how we could test the hypothesis from it. Overall, from Yinjiachan, there was 120 bone tools from the Longshan culture and 114 from the Yueshi culture, so it's fairly balanced. Those tools were all found in domestic contexts, none in burial, so this is actually also important to mention because there's no offering in it. It's mostly tools that are at the end of their life cycle or abandoned because they were no longer useful. But already from this little table of the types of tools, subtypes, we see some difference right away. First of all, in terms of awls, which are implements used to pierce different materials, soft material, namely skin, we see that this is always happening during conferences. We see that basically the same awls are maintained from the Longshan to the Yueshi, but we have a new awl type actually that starts to appear, the bipointed awl. Hairpin needle, this is fairly standard. Projectile points, we see then again some types that are being maintained, or namely the tang and the barb points, but some that are abandoned, the simple base and the lanceolate the bipointed and the lanceolate are appearing. And then we have other tool types that are emerging during the Yueshi culture, such as fishing hook scrapers, but some that are abandoned, so that as knife tubes and personal ornament. Well, we don't have much actually to say, but it seems to be continuing throughout the cultures. So here's an example actually of the awls. We have awls on truncated shafts, so this is a diaphysis that has been truncated and beveled. And we have awls on basically just pointed awls on skeletal elements. That is common actually for the two. In terms of hairpin, we see pretty much the same type of variation, but the most intriguing variation comes to needles, where the needles during the Longshan culture are very fine and small, but they become diversified in morphology during the Yueshi culture, which would indicate diversification, functional diversification for this specific, which would mean perhaps that bone needles were used to accomplish many different tasks, or more diversified tasks compared to the Longshan period. And then the projectile point, we see the maintenance of some technologies in the two cultures, but new additions of this type, the tank type actually, that is not seen in any of the Longshan culture. And the barb points are their morphology changed a little bit, but this again the sample is not big enough actually to make a secure conclusion. So, okay, this is basically what type of tools they are using. Now, if we turn at how they make these tools, is there some change actually that we can look at? And I will look at it from two different angles. First of all, what type of raw material is selected to be transformed into tools? And what type of technique is applied to make these tools? So in the Longshan culture, the main difference between the Longshan and the Yueshi relates to the truncated halls. So this is the one that are beveled, that are shown, the diaphyses that are beveled. And what we see in the Longshan culture, there's a clear preferences for birds and rabbit bone. And during the Yueshi culture, the preference is moved actually to bone from dogs. So dog bones are preferred rather than rabbit and birds. Oops, I did a mistake here. It's projectile point, not truncated. I forgot, sorry. All projectile points during the Longshan culture are made of cervid antler, as opposed to a clear preference for bovid ribs and long bone. And alternatively, whenever antler is possible, they will make some, but mainly it's from bovid bones for the projectile points in the Yueshi culture. So already there, we see a difference. And quite interestingly also, another difference that if we look at the overall osseous technology, Longshan culture seems to target wild species preferentially compared to Yueshi culture, where domesticated species are preferred. If we look at the reduction sequence of projectile point, we see also something very similar happening. Basically, in both the Yueshi and the Longshan culture, they seem to follow the same type of reduction sequence for the 10 points. They start by aligning the proximal and the distal end, make an incision, gouge the proximal end from the incision, and then put give the final shape to the object by abrasion. And so this is the procedure that is common for both cultures. Interestingly, when the lanceolate points arrive in the Yueshi culture, they use basically the same type of reduction sequence, although they simplify it a little. They no longer do an incision and gouge from it, they just gouge from it. So there's one less step that is being performed during this, for this new projectile point type. So you might wonder, well, where did this innovation come from? Did it arise actually, was it something from that that results from cultural influence that comes from outside. And if we look at lithic technology, then we basically find the answer. Because this lithic point is typical for the Longshan period. It's basically the lanceolate point that is achieved by abrasion. So this decided basically to, rather than use the very important, the limited lithic resources to create projectile point, they adapted basically knowledge that was already integrated in their cultural system from the Longshan culture for working bone tools, simplified it, and replaced a lithic point common in Longshan culture from a bone point in the Yueshi culture. So we have here a very good example of exaptation where knowledge from two cultural domains is recombined in order to bring a new adaptation in this way. We can look also at the cultural changes dynamic through morphology, and what we see is basically that all the domestic tools from the Longshan are fairly standardized, and they will become less standardized during the Yueshi culture, and we will have something opposite for hunting tools, where hunting tools or hunting armatures become more standardized during the Yueshi culture as opposed to the Longshan, which could indicate some sort of pressure in terms of subsistence and prey acquisition. So, all in all, final conclusions. What can we say about this? Is this a major population replacement? I would argue that no, it would not be a major population replacement, because we see a body of technological knowledge, know-how, that is repeated from the Longshan to the Yueshi. So there's a clear continuity in terms of the knowledge that is implemented in osseous production. If it was a major population replacement, we would have expected to see major changes in the type of bone tools, but also in the way they are making these bone tools, which is not the case at Yingjiachan. Finally, is there, we've already ruled out the contemporaneity of both, would it be environmental pressure? It is possible that owing to population fragmentation, or the group fragmentation, population decrease, relocation, that some of the knowledge might have been lost, or maybe that the preferred species, for instance, that were selected for the Longshan culture were no longer selected as a result of this, as a result of lost or maybe shift in adaptation practice. But from a single side, it's difficult to argue in favor of this hypothesis rather than any other ones. But it would seem to be the most likely scenario at this point of time. I thank you very much.